How's everyone?
Good. Thank you.
Just fine, thank you.
Good, good.
Are we okay? There's Kelvin. We're good.
I'll be doing the roll call.
Okay, you be taking care of it, Ebony?
Yes, Luann's no longer with us. She moved back to Florida.
Okay. All right. Well, go ahead and kick us off with roll call.
Sure. Chair Rogers,
Present.
Trustee Benavidez,
Here.
Trustee Floyd, Trustee Waugh, Trustee Whiteley, I see her, but she looks frozen. And for the record, we do have Trustee Zakowski on the line as well.
All right. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
No, we do not.
Okay, do we do we have a motion to accept the proposed agenda?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
You technically don't need a second with this smaller group.
Okay, thank you for that, Jared. All right, well, do we still need to vote on it?
Yes.
All right, all those in favor of accepting the proposed agenda as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, motion carries. We will go to new business and we turn it over to Floresto to give us an update on the district's financial operation.
Before we begin, sorry, just a quick question. So do we have a quorum?
You don't actually need one because, well, technically you probably do, but you don't need one because there's no action to be taken. You're just getting an update.
Thank you.
And Jerry, just to clarify, I noticed that too, that we don't have a quorum of the Finance Committee. That's the difference, right? We need 3 members of the Finance Committee.
Well, there's some argument that you would only need a majority of the people who were present. They loosened up the quorum requirements some time ago. But in any event, because it is a committee and because there's no action to be taken, you don't need a quorum because there's no action. So you can report to one or more trustees at any time.
Okay, so this committee and the trustees have attended would be sufficient if there were action. For example, to make a recommendation to approve the audit. Would we be able to take that action with this committee?
Yeah, I'd want to double check, but I'm pretty sure that they changed that a quorum now consists for governmental agencies of a majority. Now, the only off to that is it conflicts with our bylaws. So I'd have to do a little bit more to determine which takes precedence. I believe it'd be our bylaws. And we may want to consider looking at that sometime in the future. But for sure, in this situation, it's not an issue.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Jerry. It's good to know in case we don't have all members of the committee needed to take action, but that is something we will have later this calendar year for the audit. So yeah, that was good for my information. Thank you. I'm glad the trustees here were able to attend because I believe we have some interesting information for the committee and all the trustees, but we're going to start the conversation here. And this is our normal mid-year update for the trustees. So I'll start right away with our consolidated sales tax revenues, or CTX. And I'll go ahead and go through each month from the top since I think it's relevant. Starting with July, that's the first month of the fiscal year, we see an increase of 15%. And when we go to August, we see another increase, and this is compared to the same month a year before, of 11%. So that's a really good start, except you see the very next month in September, we have a decrease of 10%. So that washes out the previous month, and we go to October, and that's flat at less than 1%. And then we go to November, and we have an increase of 5%. So you can see the collections by month are all over the place. But when we take the average of the first 5 months of the fiscal year, that's an increase of 4% on average. And that's also what we budgeted. We expect CTX revenues to come in at 4% total by the end of the fiscal year compared to last fiscal year. And just for context, I thought this was interesting that if we compare this 15% increase this year, last year at this time when I updated the committee, there was a decrease of 3% compared to the 15. And this 11% increase this year was flat the year before. And we see a negative 10% increase in September. Last year in September, we saw a 20% increase. So that's a 30% swing. And my point is that this, as always, is a volatile revenue stream, at least month by month. So I wish I could say this was due to seasonality, but the consumer spending behavior is very unpredictable. And so I just wanted to point that out, that month by month, it's very hard to predict what's coming, but over a 5-month period, we're pretty comfortable with the trend because we're at 4%. We expect to collect the $31.4 million is our budgeted increase. But that can all change soon. Again, there's always discussions of a possible recession in the near future, except even if that happens, we don't know how severe it'll be. It could be mild and have no real impact on the district's financials, or it could not happen at all and we go into a boom phase. I've been listening to economists project a recession since the last recession in 2020 when the pandemic started. And that recession hasn't materialized so far, but we monitor the conditions accordingly. I'll also point out here that the last CTX we received was this November number, and we received that at the end of January. And so there's a 2-month lag between when the revenue is generated in November and when the district actually sees it in January. So that's the reason I'm showing you CTX information through November instead of through the end of January. Now, what's a more stable revenue stream are the property taxes. And I just showed the first 6 months of the current fiscal year, 2024, compared to the last fiscal year during the same time period. You can see we collected $31.9 million last year for the first 6 months and $33.7 million so far this year. That's a 6% increase, but we budgeted a 4% increase. So that's nice to see. We're on track, slightly ahead, and we would expect, as usual, to collect all of the property taxes budgeted, maybe even a little higher amount. And although that's really consistent, some of the trustees may remember our conversation at this time a year ago, where we actually were short $1 million in property taxes compared to the budget. And that's very unusual. Besides fiscal year 2023, I don't recall ever seeing property taxes coming in less than budgeted. And if you recall, the reason for that last fiscal year was due to a push by the Clark County Treasurer's Office to remind taxpayers to update their property status. For example, if a property owner was living in their primary residence, that would be taxed at no higher than 3%, meaning their taxes should not exceed 3% from the year before. Except what was happening is, property owners may move throughout the year and they move into a property that might be more expensive. And the Treasury Department, the treasurer at Clark County might start taxing that property at 8%, not knowing that that's now the taxpayer's primary residence and that should be taxed at 3%. So basically they were overpaying their property taxes, and our tax projections for real estate is based on the security rules saying that this taxpayer is paying 3% here, 8% there. But once the cleanup happened during fiscal year 2023, there was a net decrease in property taxes collected. And I just go through that story again because it was an interesting example of where we didn't collect all of the property taxes we expected. And it wasn't until late in the fiscal year that we realized that we were on track to collect less, and where we did our research and followed up with all of our peers and Clark County itself to find an explanation for why we saw a shortfall in property tax revenues. And that was important because, again, this property tax stream is real, reliable, and if it's not coming in on track, we want to know why. And again, I pointed out because even though it is consistent over the years, there's always the possibility that there is a shortfall, and we want to make sure we're prepared for that if necessary. We don't assume, basically, that we're going to get all of the property taxes we budget, even though that's almost always the case 99% of the time. So these are our major property tax sources. I'll jump into the expenditures now because this will lead into the conversation I really wanted to go deeper on with the trustees, and that's expenditures. So these are the expenditures for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. And you can see $34.9 million at this time last fiscal year, $37.9 million through December of this fiscal year. That's a 9% increase, and we budgeted a 15% increase. So we're planning on coming in, we should come in under budget, but we always do. That's actually the plan based on how we prepare the budget every year. So I'll talk about that in a moment, but I'll also point out here that this 9% actual increase for the first 6 months and this 15% budget increase for the year is relatively high. And if we were to go back in time, our increases in expenditures in total are closer to the 8% range on average. But because of the pandemic, we've really been tightening our belts over the years, and we haven't been increasing total expenditures much at all. That's given us the benefit of accumulating reserves that we were able to transfer to capital projects. And that's also the reason we're able to fund the new West Las Vegas library. But my point here is that although this increase looks large in the fiscal year 2023 to 2024 comparison, if we looked at the entire period going back to 2020, on average, we're right where we would expect to be at about a 4 to 8% increase in expenditures year after year. It's just that we saw a big jump in the expenditures in 2024 as we expected to open up fully and started offering more programs, more than we did over the last 2 years because of the change in our operation due to the pandemic. And this is something new that, well, it's not new, but it's information we haven't presented in quite a bit of time. It's a projection. And the reason we haven't really presented a multi-year projection most recently is, again, the pandemic. The economy shut down, for months and was, nearly decimated for all of 2020 going into 2021. So there wasn't really much value in presenting a projection because no one really knew what would happen year to year. Even within the year, we were all surprised by the decreases we've seen in certain revenues, like the consolidated sales tax, but then that nothing changed with property taxes. That was, again, a really reliable source of revenue. And because of the property tax caps, there was no decrease in that revenue stream. And even more surprisingly, property tax owners were able to continue making their payments. And there was a lot of reasons for that. And one of them is, the federal government, providing stimulus checks to citizens in order to make sure they can make ends meet during a challenging economic time. But again, that was a surprise. And who would have known that not only did that hold up the economy during the last few years, but it's actually having an impact now and going forward. For example, like a lot of economists has greatly unpredicted or was not able to predict the amount of savings that a lot of consumers have. Many consumers who receive stimulus checks bank that money because they weren't able to spend much of it, from the pandemic up until a year or so ago. And although we've all expected them to have exhausted those savings, apparently that hasn't happened. Even in Southern Nevada, where we can see consumer behavior by what's happening with the consolidated sales tax. But with that said, the dust is settling to the point where staff was comfortable with presenting at least a 5-year projection of where we believe the district's financial health would be. And I'm going to start with the first column, fiscal year 2023 actual. These are audited numbers. So these are the numbers that we actually experienced last fiscal year. And you can see that even after this large transfer out of $34 million, we ended up with a $23.5 million ending fund balance in the general fund, which is 34% of total expenditures. That's well above where we would like to see a safe margin, which is 20%, depending on the economy. But you may remember that in the most recent budget, 2024, we planned for a 15% ending fund balance. Again, that's 15% of the total expenditures, which is what we consider a safe margin. The reason we ended up with such a large transfer and high ending fund balance is what I alluded to earlier, in that we weren't spending more than needed to operate current programming in library operations, because we wanted to make sure that we can continue being financially stable going forward. And we're now seeing that that's the case. Although, again, we always monitor the economy and the district's revenues very closely. We ended up with a $55.9 million reserve or ending fund balance in the capital projects fund. Again, I'm not breaking down the figures in the capital projects fund in too much detail because we'll be doing that for the tentative budget. We're in the middle of our budget cycle now, and we'll be discussing the capital projects fund more there. But what I wanted to show here was more detail on the general fund, the operating fund, and how that contributes to what is available in the capital projects fund. And yeah, I know I'm moving through this fairly quickly, so feel free for any of the trustees to jump in at any time if you got any questions for me so far.
And then Floresto, just to sort of connect the previous slide with the expenditures to this current slide for the 2024 budgeted, the personnel, well, I guess salaries, wages, employees benefits, service supplies, those numbers are representative of being fully operational from the pandemic, and they are sort of at 15%, but we're coming in around 8-9%.
Yes, that's correct, Chair Rogers.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And that's a good topic to cover quickly, is that, yeah, these are the numbers that are the basis of us, the district, being fully opened for the most part. And so this is the foundation of how we start projecting numbers into fiscal year 25. I highlighted the fiscal year 24 budget here because, as I mentioned with expenditures, we budget at 100% of all possible costs we're aware of. So that means, for example, salaries and wages and employee benefits, these numbers are higher than either 2023 or 2025, because we're assuming that for salaries and benefits, all positions with the district are occupied or filled for 100% of the fiscal year, which is not the case. We know that there is a vacancy factor. For example, if we have 800 budgeted positions, roughly 700 of those positions might actually be filled at any given time throughout the fiscal year, meaning there are 100 positions that are vacant which represent savings. So we won't spend the entire salaries and benefits budget. But again, that's our budget practice, is to budget 100%, because if for some reason we did have 100% of positions filled, we want to make sure we can actually pay these individuals without exceeding our budget. I'll talk a little more about our budget practice in a little bit, but going back to fiscal year 23, what I want to point out in the capital projects fund is we ended up with 55, almost 56 million, but that was really necessary because during this time, we were well into the planning stages of the new West Las Vegas library. So you can see that in fiscal year 24, that's the year we're in now, we budgeted another $16 million to go from the general fund to capital projects, and yet our capital ending fund balance drops to $35 million. And that's because we're spending $25 million on the West Las Vegas library this fiscal year, 2024. And so we move out the next fiscal year to 2025, and you'll see we have another $19 million budgeted to go from the general fund to the capital projects fund. And that ends up leading to $33 million in leftover at the end of the fiscal year for 2025. And that number is not higher because we are going to be completing construction of the new West Las Vegas library in 2025. So
And then Foresto, is that assumption based on us fully funding the library project from the capital projects fund and not taking into account like new market tax credits that will come to the project or other development work that may materialize?
That actually does account for the new markets tax credit program and those subsidies. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, Mr. Chair, because it's really important as part of this projection analysis. So just to cover a little bit more on that now, this $33 million left over in 2025, and again, these are capital project balances. This is what's left to invest in other major capital projects. That's taking into account that we are receiving about $6 million in federal funds to pay for the cost of the West Las Vegas library, which means that had we not collected those funds, we would have $6 million less in this reserve. And another factor to consider is we are actually selling or have sold the current West Las Vegas library site. That's the land and improvements there for about $3 million to the city of Las Vegas. Because we are moving that library from its current site to the new library site, we are able to collect those proceeds at $3 million. That's more funding that is going towards construction costs. So between new markets funding and the proceeds from the sale of the current West Las Vegas library, that's $9 million that's offsetting the cost of construction. And we're talking about a $40 million project in the new West Las Vegas library. So almost $10 million is being saved through those two sources of funds, which means that had we not had them, this $33 million we're seeing here would really be $23 million. And so again, that's important in the short term, but as we look out 5 years, that becomes even more important because you can see that we go from $33 million in 2025. Again, this is the available balance in capital projects, and that increases to $41 million, $47 million, $50, and then it starts decreasing. And so you can see this is good information for staff and the trustees to consider when evaluating future projects. On the one hand, we have the flexibility based on these numbers we're looking at in capital projects to fund another major project. Except hypothetically, let's say that's a new library. You can see another $40 million project like a library would completely exhaust these reserves. And I always emphasize the need for reserves in the capital projects fund, primarily for the critical programs. I'm always bringing back to our attention, IT replacements, building maintenance and repair. And so that's good to consider. Another area I'd like to highlight here is, let's start from the top again, the revenues. I just went over property tax and sales tax revenues. That's the ad valorem taxes here. That's property taxes. The intergovernmental line item is the consolidated sales tax. As I mentioned, those revenue streams are consistent over time. So I'm very comfortable in these total revenue numbers incrementally increasing consistently going all the way to 2025. That's a good sign. Regardless of what may happen in the economy between now and then, we can rely on those revenues. Now, the total expenditures, as I mentioned, we budget high in a budget year like 2024. We're working on 2025, but these are the actual numbers we expect to spend in all of these projected years, meaning that we sharpen our pencils for the projection. These salaries and benefits amounts, that's not based on 100% filled vacancies. We actually estimate what the vacancy factor is and determine what we really believe we're going to pay in that fiscal year. So it's lower than what the budget will be in all of these budget years. And again, we'll be going over the fiscal year 25 budget soon with this committee and with the full board in May.
And then Foresto, if I may just ask a question. I know that for 24, we use 15%, right? So are we back down to the sharpening the pencils in addition to what you said about accounting for a staff attrition and vacancies? Are you no longer using that 15% threshold, or now you're going back to that traditional 8-9%?
We plan for 2025 to use the 15% safety
So you're
margin.
still using 15%?
Yes. For projection
Okay.
purposes, we wanted to be, a little more conservative and go to 20%. So you can see that if we drop this to 15%, that actually would free up more funds. So these numbers across the board will be higher, but we also wanted to project a scenario of positive cash flow. And you'll see here the excess or deficiency of revenues over under expenditures. That's basically, our revenues higher or lower than expenditures. And these numbers are positive, which we like to see. We always like to see revenues higher than expenditures, except if we were to go to a 15% margin or ending fund balance as a percentage of total expenditures, this actually goes negative. And again, we didn't want to be too aggressive in our projections because we want to look at the future in terms of a safe progression in our budget, our spending based on revenues. But as I mentioned, the revenues are consistent. The expenditures are under our control to an extent. Salaries and benefits will be consistent over approximately the next 2 or 3 fiscal years because we just negotiated a collective bargaining agreement that will dictate the increases over the next few years. But at some point around 2028, we'll be, as early as 2027, perhaps, we'll be discussing the collective bargaining agreement again. And we don't know at this time what those increases are going to be. And every 1% increase in staff members' merit raise or COLA increase is going to have a huge impact on these numbers going forward. We can control services and supplies as we always have, except that has an effect on programming. So you can see the increase in services and supplies was pretty steep from 2023 to 2024 because, as I mentioned, we were more fully open. So assuming that trend continues and we continue to increase programming or keeping them at a higher level, this is the expectation of what those expenditures will be. And capital outlay represents library and media materials, and that increases steadily because that's basically a percentage of the total budget, which is 15%. But what I wanted to point out here, though, is that this increase in total expenditures for every year looking 5 years out is rising at a higher rate than revenues. So even though we get comfort in knowing that these revenues are reliable, by looking at the rate at which expenditures are increasing, and like I mentioned, it's outpacing the increase in revenues. These expenditures are outpacing the revenue growth. If we go out another 5 years, we'll see that really our balances, our reserve, our ability to transfer funds to capital projects diminishes. We can already see that here. We had the large $34 million transfer in 23, but that was to fund the new West Las Vegas library. Starting in 2025, you can see we can afford to transfer 19 million, then 18.5 million. Then it goes to 16 million. We can see the trend here. We're going to 14 million, 10 million. And that's just going to continue over time if all other things are held equal. So there's no reason to present another 5 years because then this projection really does become a crystal ball. Like, it's hard to project what will happen next fiscal year, much less 10 years from now. But this is a good start in seeing the trends and where we believe we're going to be over the next 5 years. It gives staff and the trustees a lot of insight to where we are, where we believe we're going to be, and how that impacts our decisions going forward on what projects to fund. Again, in the operating fund, we can sustain this for years, except what's really important is what we're transferring out to the capital projects fund, because the operating fund is the only source of revenue for capital projects. Without the general fund creating a transfer every year, saving enough to make a transfer to capital projects, the capital projects fund can't operate. And that'll be one thing if we just can't afford to build a new project, for example, another library. But even without planning to build another major project, we have reserves that are necessary in the capital projects fund. There's at least $10 million a year that must be expended in the capital projects fund for, again, our critical programs, IT replacements and upgrades, building maintenance repair. In discussions with the administrative team, we've determined that community engagement, requires a reserve to maintain our venues for customers. And so that's another potentially $1 million that should be maintained every year in the capital program to fund those needs to maintain our venues. And so that's what I wanted to get across to the trustees in this presentation. I know there are a lot of numbers here, and I could do an even deeper dive. I'll save it for the budget presentations, but I thought it was really important to let the Finance and Audit Committee know where we stand, because this not only drives our budget, it really is going to put in context the decisions that are made by the board going forward on what our priorities are in capital projects. And so with that, I'll give the trustees an update on the New Markets Tax Credit Program. And a lot of this information has already been provided in the past and in financial services reports for the board, but it was worth going over again at this time. We ended up partnering with 4 different investors, or CDEs, as we call them, to raise $33.5 million in allocation for the New Markets Program. We expect approximately 17% of that amount to be generated in real funds that'll be directed towards the West Las Vegas project to offset construction costs. And that will add up to about $5.7 million. And again, we already discussed this, but it's worth mentioning that that's a 17% discount on the cost of construction for the West Las Vegas Library project. And I'll go back here and emphasize the importance of these numbers, although they look healthy on their face, could be much less. The $6 million is allowing $6 million to be available, $6 million more dollars to be available in capital projects. And I also talked about the $3 million in proceeds that we received for the sale of West Las Vegas. Going back again to the hypothetical capital project, if a new library were to be built, if that's a decision made by the executive director and this board, that the current West Las Vegas Library project is coming in at a price tag of about $40 million. And we've already seen the escalation in costs for this project, the new West Las Vegas Library, which is why this $6 million was so important. The scope of the new library might have been limited had it not been for the additional funds we got from New Markets and the $3 million in proceeds. A brand new library, actually, we won't have the benefit of selling anything to raise proceeds to go towards that library. And moreover, that library, potential new library, may not be located in a distressed community the way the new West Las Vegas Library is. So it wouldn't be available for potentially $5, $6, $7, $8 million in funding, which means that, let's say, ballpark, a new library would cost $50 million to build over the next 2 to 3 years, over this 5-year projection. You can see that the reserves in capital projects at this point would not be sufficient. So again, that is something that I'm sure was in the back of our minds. We'd love to be able to provide new services to different parts of our community and new programming. But again, it's really now that we need to start thinking about that. Now that the dust has settled in the economy and we are well underway with the new West Las Vegas Library project, it should be on track for construction sometime in the last half of calendar year 2025. But again, I just wanted to emphasize that for the trustees also, because we want to be prepared and to provide the trustees with the information needed to identify future initiatives and the priorities for those capital initiatives. But going back to the New Markets Program, I mentioned the return we expect from our investment from these CDE partners. And I wanted to mention that we are not done seeking more New Markets funding. There's actually the opportunity to seek more funding from the state of Nevada. That's opposed to the $6 million in funds that we're receiving from the federal government program. I hesitate to provide dollar amounts here because they look promising, except at this point, staff isn't aware of whether we can, as the district, even take advantage of new markets funding from the state. And there's also the possibility that in the new fiscal year, we can seek out more community development entity partners that may be able to contribute more allocation to the West Las Vegas Library. It's going to be under construction for approximately the next 18 months. So that gives us time to seek more funding from federal new markets funds and from state new markets funds. So I just wanted to give the trustees again, a heads up that that's in the works. Staff is diligently working on that, along with wrapping up the current new markets transaction for the new West Las Vegas Library. I mentioned here that there's a budget impact because the state of Nevada funds has requirements that we're trying to qualify for, and that'll have a budget impact because there may be the need to sacrifice some property tax revenues in order to get that benefit. But I'll provide more information to the trustees as we get that information. But I wanted to go over this summary of where we are because where we're going is towards closing of this current West Las Vegas Library project transaction. And again, staff is working diligently with all of our partners to close out this transaction. And we also need the trustees' approval for a lot of the next steps that are coming. In the month of February, and we're well into it, we will need board approval for the construction contracts for the West Las Vegas Library project. General Services Director John Vino will be presenting that to the board. And again, this is not something that can wait until the March meeting. So we plan on asking the trustees to convene for a special meeting late in February. We didn't have the time to prepare all the different agenda items that we need the trustees to review, but we also don't have time to wait for the March board meeting in order to get approval. So the construction contracts will be presented to the board, along with resolutions for the new markets tax credit program. Staff will need authorization from the board to ratify all of the transactions that are in place. Again, closing requires a lot of agreements to be finalized, a lot of transfers of funds between the district, these community development entities, and the Library District Foundation. There's a district foundation meeting on this Thursday, at the same time as the Board of Trustees meeting. And library staff will be bringing a resolution to the foundation board for their approval. That's ready to go. And there's no reason to wait for their approval, the foundation board's approval for their part, the role they're playing in the new markets program. But we did need more time to present the Board of Trustees with the resolution and other items for your review later this month. So again, we're coordinating that now. Hopefully, we'll be able to lock in dates soon so we can ensure a quorum at the special meeting that we plan for later in February. One other item that we will bring at that meeting is approval of the board of directors for the West Las Vegas Library Qualic B. This is the nonprofit that is created in order to hold title of the new building. We've done this with the East Las Vegas Library and the Mesquite Library. So there are those two Qualic Bs, I'm sure the trustees are aware of, that hold title to those library buildings, East Las Vegas and Mesquite. The 7-year compliance period is actually ending soon. We're required to maintain the structure between the district, the foundation, and the Qualic Bs for 7 years. And then after that time has expired, the title of the ownership, basically, of the libraries reverts back to the library district. So right now, these Qualic Bs or nonprofit corporations actually own the East Las Vegas Library, the Mesquite Library, and the new Qualic B will own the West Las Vegas Library. But this is where the board of the Qualic B is very important, because technically these Qualic Bs, these nonprofits, own these libraries. And so the program is designed for, after the 7-year compliance period is over, the Quality B must approve the transfer of the library back to the district. So this is all just for the trustees' background. It's a refresher for many of the trustees, but the West Las Vegas Library Quality B nonprofit corporation is in formation now, and it'll require approval of the board of trustees to appoint every director on that West Las Vegas Quality B board. And again, I'd like to thank Dr. Rogers for agreeing to serve on that Quality B board, along with Secretary Hiron is another trustee who will serve on that board. And the library CFO also serves as president of the board. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned, that board controls who owns the actual property, who has title. And so we like to give the library district comfort that that will happen again, and it requires control of the board, which is why the CFO and 2 members of the board of trustees serve on that board. And really, it's a 5-member board. There's another 2 directors that are friends of the library. So for the new West Las Vegas Quality B, we've also asked Senator Mo Dennis to serve on that board, and former trustee Michael Saunders. Yeah, both of those directors already serve on the Quality B boards for the East Las Vegas Library and the Mesquite Library. And again, this is a program, a process designed by council to ensure the security of the library district's investments and assets. So I just wanted to give the trustees comfort that, you know, there aren't any issues there, because we controlled the transfer and transactions happening in the new markets program. It's just that that's some context for you when we staff bring the board of directors to the board of trustees for approval. So that's another item to expect, you know, soon as the special meeting at the end of February. So that's what I wanted to present to the Finance and Audit Committee. And I believe I touched on all the areas that not only help the trustees consider future projects and the impact the budget has on them, an update on the new markets tax credit program and all of the activities that are happening between now and really the end of February. A lot of this needs to be wrapped up, and we'll need the trustees' approval and involvement to make that happen. All right, any questions for me on all of that?
And I'll open up for questions to the committee members and our other board members who are on the call. All right, I counted 3 Mississippi. Okay.
Oh, can I ask one question? I'm so sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Trustee Whiteley. We can hear you.
I'm so sorry. I have had so many challenges with my Zoom crashing. But I actually was able to listen the whole time. Director Gabais, I just have one question, and this might just be a show of my ignorance more than anything else. In your 5-year projection, when you take us through 2029, is that 2029 even really valid, knowing that we're going to have new labor negotiations? Is that something we should even really be considering, or I'm just trying to think long term?
It's good to consider as a ballpark estimate, because yeah, you're absolutely, you know, correct, Treasurer Whiteley, that we have really no idea what that amount will be, given we'll have a new collective bargaining agreement in place there. Mm-hmm. But it's good as a placeholder to give us an idea of the direction we're going in. So depending on a new CBA that's going to change the increases in salaries and benefits when that's implemented, it'll let us know right away the trend of these important lines I highlighted. The transfers out, you know, how much can we continue to transfer out in these out years, and what effect does that have on the capital projects ending fund balance? Because again, this is why I hesitate to go any further than 5 years, but the current 5-year projection gives us an idea of, the potential direction we're going in and the factors we need to consider when making decisions on major capital projects. And that's not to
absolutely.
mention.
This is
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to point out that although the concern is maintaining capital projects fund balances because we're maintaining 20% reserves in the general fund, that's not to say that the general fund isn't impacted itself. For example, a new library, that's my example. Again, it's for the Board of Trustees to determine the capital project initiatives. But a new library, for example, on top of the West Las Vegas Library is going to increase operating costs. And to your point, that has a huge impact on salaries and benefits. The new West Las Vegas Library is going to take the place of the current West Las Vegas Library. So on paper, there should be no net increase in operating because we're closing one library and moving it to another library location. Except even then, we know that our operating costs for the new West Las Vegas Library are going to increase. As of right now, there's at least a couple positions that are going to be brand new to the West Las Vegas Library. We're going to be providing more multimedia programming, and so that's going to require a multimedia supervisor, and along with that, a multimedia specialist. So those are two brand new positions that didn't exist in the current West Las Vegas Library. And there are many more because of the programming we're going to be providing at the new library. That alone is going to increase the salaries and benefits costs, and that's where we know is going to happen right now versus any new capital projects. A new library is going to add as many as 40 different brand new positions, which is a huge impact on our salary and benefits costs. So again, it goes back to your point that in 2029, we know that number is not going to be right on, but the question is, what direction is it going in? And that's what informs our decision going forward.
Yeah, this is incredibly helpful, and the perspective that you put it in is terrific. And you took my next question exactly out of my mouth, which was related to, even expanding that salaries and wages and employee benefits number moving forward once West Las Vegas is open, because that doesn't look like we've done that very much. But yeah, thank you for that. I was just curious if, this even looks rosier in 2029 than we should reasonably expect it to look. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And that's exactly how I was looking at it too. It definitely does look rosier, but we know that this could be completely different, which is why staff will be updating this as we go along, and we can have these kind of conversations. So, the trustees can have their questions answered and we can address any concerns that staff has or that the board has.
Thank you.
I think Trustee Dukowski was going to ask a question as well.
Actually, no, I just wanted to have a comment that I appreciate all this information from Director Cabayas, and it was very clear what you explaining to us. I appreciate your time to do this. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions? Oresta, thank you for the thorough update as always. You make it difficult to ask questions because you're so thorough with your presentation. So
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we will transition. As I said, that was for information only. We will transition to our public comment. Do we have anyone sign up for public comment?
No, there are no public comments, but I do want to point out that Trustee Whiteley and Trustee Haran did join the meeting for the record.
Thank you. All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. We are officially adjourned. Everyone, thank you. Everybody have a great rest of your day and week.
See you Thursday.
Thank you.